Hey everyone, welcome back. We're in the middle of step 8, where we're getting ready to have our amends conversations with the people we need to do that with. This week we're going to take a little detour, but it's definitely along the same lines of awkward conversations that we'd rather avoid, but need to have with people. And like amends, it's also a topic that is intended to strengthen relationships. But most importantly, this is something we need to do to protect our sobriety. I'm talking about boundary conversations. Personal boundaries are rules and limits we establish to keep ourselves safe, emotionally and physically. Boundary conversations are how we let others know what our personal boundaries are. These conversations are an important part of life, but most people are afraid to have them. Many of us fear that if we tell somebody what we need, they'll get mad at us, think we're weak, judge us, or some other negative consequence will occur. So we avoid having the conversation and end up feeling resentful toward the person. That resentment festers, and we start to treat them badly. They have no idea we're resentful, so all they see is that we seem to be agitated a lot and we don't treat them very nicely. Telling people how we feel and what we need usually clears these situations up, and it's just a more honest way to live. In recovery, it is especially important to have boundaries. Our sobriety depends on it. Many relapses occur because we think we can be around other people that are using. We hang around with friends or family that are using, and we eventually fall to our addiction despite our best intentions. In early recovery especially, do not test your sobriety this way. You are setting yourself up for relapse. Instead, have the difficult but necessary conversations about your boundaries with those you care about. It's not easy, but in the end, they will respect you more. More importantly, you're respecting yourself enough to do what is necessary for your sobriety. You are setting a personal boundary that you cannot be around people that are using, period. There's some other important boundaries as well, which we'll get to in a minute. Now, when we do groups on this topic where I work, we spend close to 3 hours on it, talking about the techniques and then practicing. This video is going to go longer than our usual 10 to 15 minutes, and we're going to split it into 2 parts because I'm going to give you a bunch of techniques and then we're going to demonstrate them. Then you are going to go have homework to practice. We'll provide a lot of guidance on how to get your practice in, so don't worry about that right now. Just pay attention to the techniques. One other word of caution before we jump in, and that is do not have your boundary conversation with someone at the same time as your amends. You might want to get them both over with at the same time, but please don't do that. These are very different conversations and need to be done at different times. I suggest you do the boundary conversation first because it's more pressing. Let's spend just a minute on the types of boundaries we may need to address, and then we'll get to the techniques of the conversation. The first type we need to address is setting the boundary that you cannot be around people that use or drink. At some point down the line, you may be able to handle it, but like I said, don't test it. Wait at least a year or 2 before you even think about it. Another boundary is letting someone know that they need to not get overly invested in your recovery. That's a nice way of saying back off and let me manage my own program. That one is really hard because your significant other or family member does have a vested interest in your recovery. They've been hurt and they need things to change. But them trying to control you is not going to help. It could actually hurt, and it's not healthy for either of you or the relationship. There are dozens of types of boundaries that you may need to let others know about. I need to have my personal space respected, so please don't hug me. I'm very sensitive about my weight, so please don't comment on what I eat. Please knock before you enter the room. I need you to show up when you say you're going to, so I'm not waiting around. Don't use my tools without asking and put them back when you're done. I am not okay with name-calling, even if you're angry with me. We're going to focus today on the ones around recovery, but the techniques we're going to talk about can be applied to any boundary conversation. Let's get to it. How do you have an effective boundary conversation? The key is to make sure the other person knows exactly what the boundary is and what will happen if they cross it. The tricky part is doing it in a way that is respectful and non-threatening, but it's not actually as hard as you might think, and many people are amazed at the results. Here are the do's and don'ts, and then we'll show you what it looks like. First, prepare for the conversation ahead of time. You do not want to go into this cold, so practice with another person. 2. Set up a time to talk in advance, or ask the person if they have time to talk before you jump into it. 3. Let the person know that they are important to you and you care about them. That's why you want to talk to them about this. You might even throw in something you appreciate about them. 4. Be assertive but calm. The main difference between assertive and aggressive is the emotional intensity. Contrary to what your angry side tells you, people actually hear us better when we're calm. 5. Take ownership that the boundary is being set because you have the issue, not the other person. It's really important that we don't sound judgmental or that we're saying the other person has a problem. We have the problem, not them. 6. Let the person know why the boundary is important to you. If you feel safe, be vulnerable about how you feel. I'll demonstrate what that looks like in a minute. 7. Be clear and direct. Don't dance around the topic and leave room for interpretation. 8. Set consequences if the boundary is violated. Sometimes this is not necessarily in the first conversation. Use your judgment on that one. 9. Be flexible about how you accomplish the boundary without compromising the boundary itself. We'll demonstrate this as well. 10. Be prepared for the consequences to yourself if you need to act on the boundary violation. This one can be super difficult, especially if the consequence is leaving the house for a while or ending a relationship. But it's important that you are firm on the boundary and follow through, so you have to be ready for that. Here are the don'ts. First, don't judge or blame the other person. Remember, this is about your issue, not theirs. Do not make it about their issues or how they act. Your only concern is the boundary. Second, don't be ambiguous about what you're asking. Resist the temptation to soft pedal or sugarcoat things. 3. Don't compromise on the boundary. It's okay to be flexible, but be firm on the bottom line. And 4, don't get defensive or engage in an argument. If it starts to get heated, call a timeout and agree on a time that you will resume the talk. Okay, so what we're going to do now is demonstrate what this looks like. I'm going to have a boundary conversation with my wife, letting her know that I can't have her drinking around me and I can't see her visibly intoxicated around me. For this first round, I'm going to do all the talking and we'll put up on the screen which of the guidelines I'm using. Christy isn't going to respond during this first round. We'll get to how to deal with obstacles next week. Hey, sweetheart. Thank you so much for setting aside time to meet with me today. Is now still a good time?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay, thank you. So, as you know, I've been working really hard on my recovery and on my program and trying to stay sober. And I just wanted to thank you again for all your support in that. I know I go to a lot of meetings and I talk to my sponsor quite a bit, and that takes away from our time. So I really appreciate you being supportive of all that. So I need to protect my sobriety at all costs, right? I mean, we both know that that's a necessity. I cannot afford a slip. I cannot afford a relapse. I can't afford to lose my job. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose my life, basically. So I have to do everything I can to stay sober. And so, again, I appreciate you. We've cleared all the alcohol out of the house. You don't drink in front of me when we're at restaurants or here, so that's really helpful. But I've noticed that I get super triggered, and it's really hard for me in my sobriety, and it's a big relapse trigger for me when I can tell that you've been drinking. So, like, when you come home from being out with the girls and sometimes coming home from work, I can smell the alcohol and I can see that you're a little tipsy, and it's just so hard for me to not want to take a drink too, because I see how happy you are and how relaxed, and it's like, that would be so nice, like old days, like the old times, right? To have a drink with you and carry on our evening that way. But I'm reminded of old times because I don't know when to stop. So I need to not be around you if you're tipsy when you're tipsy. And so I'd really appreciate your help with that, if you can, to just help me with that. Like I said, it's not your problem, it's my problem. I'm the alcoholic, and I own that, but I do need help. So that's my ask. So if you'll notice, during that initial conversation with Christy, I didn't actually set a consequence. As I said, the consequence piece is optional. You kind of have to gauge what's going on in the conversation as to whether or not you're going to set the consequence at this point. Christy may just agree and say, yes, I'm in, that's fine. Then a consequence is not really necessary, and it sounds more threatening than it needs to. Now, you'll notice towards the end of that conversation, Christy got a little bit defensive, sat back, crossed her arms. Her body language is telling me she may not be hip to this jive. So next week, we're going to talk about obstacles and what happens if the boundary is crossed. Hopefully, hearing what the conversation sounds like helps make the guidelines more clear for you. Now, I thought I did a pretty good job and I followed all the rules. But just because you follow the guidelines doesn't mean that the other person isn't going to have a reaction. The person you are talking to has their own set of issues, and they may not react well to you trying to set boundaries with them. They may feel that you are judging them, punishing them, or taking something away from them. They may feel you are overreacting and going overboard with your recovery efforts. They may feel you are dragging them into your problems when they have nothing to do with them. And they may violate your boundary. But we're out of time. So that will have to wait till next week. Your homework is to practice the techniques we talked about today. You may be one of those lucky people that doesn't need to have a boundary conversation with anyone around your recovery, but I'm guessing someone out there is doing something that bothers you, so give it some thought. In any case, practice having the conversation with someone safe, or just do it on your own. But say it out loud. It's always easier in your head. When you say it out loud, you'll get much more out of it. Next week, we'll talk about dealing with objections and what to do if the person violates your boundary. Until then, stay sober, one day at a time. I'll see you next week.